I'm Teresa Rashid with EAG TV, and joining me now is Mark Mix, the president of National Right to Work. And we're going to talk about a situation in Ohio where some teachers are suing the Ohio Education Association. Mark, can you tell me why your organization decided to get involved in this case?
Well, Teresa, since 1968, we have been representing employees and providing free legal aid to employees across the country whose rights have been violated by compulsory unionism arrangements. And unfortunately for the teachers in Ohio, and the class that we're working with here is about 15 teachers from all across your state, this is a familiar story that goes on all across the country, where union officials have been able to get compulsory dues privilege, meaning they force you to pay dues or fees to them to keep your job. There's a real need for legal defense foundations like ours to come in and defend the rights of these teachers. And so in Ohio, unfortunately, what's happening here is that many teachers in the state are required to pay union dues and fees to the OEA, the Ohio Education Association, as a condition of their continued employment. And the OEA turns around and uses that money for purposes that are illegal under various court precedents that have been established by the attorneys here at the Right to Work Foundation. So it's our privilege to be able to work for these employees and frankly, to have employees like them across the country that will stand up and have the courage to stand up against this and fight back. And it's our privilege to work with them in this instance.
Can you tell me, Mark, why that teachers have to take legal action to separate themselves from teachers' unions?
Yeah, we wish that wasn't the case, but indeed it is, because the Ohio law, under a statute that goes all the way back to 1982, I believe it was, with Dick Celeste, said that workers were, first of all, forced to accept the representation of the teachers' union in the public school system in Ohio. And then, as to add insult to injury, were forced to pay that teachers' union dues or fees for the privilege, quote unquote, of giving up their right to represent themselves. And then the law says that if they don't pay those fees, they'll lose their jobs. And so in the case of the teachers in Ohio, they're compelled to pay these fees. The information about how the union uses these fees is very, very suspect when it comes to their use of it for politics and ideological causes that workers might oppose, lobbying in the legislature in Columbus. There are specific rules about what the teachers' union officials can do with this money. And unfortunately, as an individual, a teacher out there that may not have a working knowledge of labor law or public sector labor law in Ohio is sometimes overwhelmed by just the need to get information about what the unions are doing. And so that's why we can come along and partner with these people, come alongside them, and help them vindicate their rights. Because unfortunately, under the law in Ohio, they can be forced to pay these fees as a condition of their job. And it doesn't matter whether they're the best teacher, the worst teacher, a medium teacher, a white teacher, a black teacher, doesn't matter. If they don't tender those fees, they don't work. And that's why we've got to be involved with these folks, and why we're really pleased that they contacted us and allowed us to help them in this case, because the issue of government unionism in Ohio has become a major issue. And obviously, Teresa, we'll maybe talk about this as we move along here. The issue of Senate Bill 5 that was passed by the legislature is going to be on the ballot in November, has real implications about the rights of teachers and, frankly, all taxpayers and government employees in your state.
I understand that National Right to Work is also looking to get into class action suits for teachers who are in a similar situation like what's going on in Ohio?
That's right. What we try to do is, by using like in this case, the 15 teachers that have come to us and say, we believe our rights have been violated, and we're convinced that everyone else who is similarly situated like us probably has no understanding of what's going on. So what we'll do is we'll use the case and use these 15 teachers, and we'll ask the court to grant us status as representative of the entire class of teachers in Ohio who are being subjected to these same violations of their rights. This goes back to a Supreme Court case we won, I want to say back in, it was the early 90s, I believe, called Hudson, Teachers Union versus Hudson, where we were able to establish at the United States Supreme Court basic rights that teachers had if they're forced to pay these dues, what the union has to provide to them as far as information about how the dues are being spent. So by taking this case on behalf of the 15, we'll try to convince the courts out there that every single teacher in the state of Ohio has been subjected to the same use of their dues and fees, and they ought to know about it, and they ought to also know about their rights. And so by getting a class action lawsuit, we can allow the courts to help us get information to all teachers in Ohio and let them know what's happening. The same thing's happening to them that's happening to these 15 teachers that have come to us.
Mark, I've heard the argument actually that teachers can just opt out of the union. This is a little different because these teachers want more control over how the money is spent, correct? That's different than opting out.
Well, that's right. There's several kind of ways that have been created by the courts to hopefully protect workers' rights. Ultimately, the ultimate protection is a right to work law for teachers saying you don't have to associate with the union, you don't have to pay them any dues or fees to keep your job. That's the ultimate protection. Until we get to that point, and actually Senate Bill 5 has that protection in it, and that's why organized labor is fighting so vehemently against it, because it will give Ohio government employees a choice as to whether or not they want to pay dues or fees to a union. But here's what happens in reality. Under Ohio law, teachers can be forced into the union collective, the teachers union. They can say, you can't talk to your employer anymore. You can't talk to the principal, the superintendent. You have to have a union official present when you talk to them. The terms and conditions of your employment have been set out already in this quote-unquote contract that you had no say over, basically, as a non-member of the union. Because in order to exercise your rights to control how your money's spent politically, you have to resign from the union, okay? In order to indicate, to have your rights protected, you've got to resign from the union, say, I don't want to be a member of you anymore. Unfortunately, that still means you still have to pay fees to the union to keep your job. But by being able to practice or execute your individual rights and your political rights as to not having your money used for causes you oppose, you've got to give up your workplace rights on the other hand, meaning you can't vote in union elections. You can't vote on the contract that governs the terms and conditions of your employment. And in order to maintain those rights, your workplace rights, you've got to forfeit your free speech or your First Amendment rights as to how that money is being spent for causes and candidates you would oppose. So in order to execute your rights here, you've got to give up your rights here. So opting out is really not a very viable position for folks because there's two rights at play here: their workplace rights and their free speech political rights, and they've got to give up one or the other in order to exercise the other. And so that's not really a solution. And so the case that we're litigating on behalf of these teachers in Ohio is trying to give them the protections that have been granted by the Supreme Court that has failed to get to the very core issue that you shouldn't have this Hobson's choice. You should be able to protect your First Amendment speech rights, and you ought to be able to protect your workplace rights, because you should never be forced to join or pay dues to a private organization as a condition of employment. So the right to opt out is really a meaningless right because of the necessary forfeiture of the opposing right, i.e. the workplace rights here. We believe that a worker should be able to choose whether or not they want to join a union and whether they want that union to represent them or not. That's the ultimate in individual freedom. And then there's no friction or conflict between workplace rights and kind of free speech rights as are coming to bear in this case. And you'll hear much more about as the OEA and other government union officials use their vast treasuries to oppose Senate Bill 5, which actually would give more rights to individual workers in the government, in the state of Ohio.
Mark, is there anything else that you want to say about this case?
Well, I want to say that, first of all, thanks to the teachers that have the courage to stand up and fight and say, the principles of my rights are more important than, unfortunately, comfort in the classroom or in the faculty room or in our school districts, because the intimidation and the coercion that goes on in these situations is unfortunate and really a kind of a darker side of the ability of workers to stand up and have their rights vindicated. And that's something we certainly are aware of here at Right to Work. We have about 240 cases going on as we sit here and talk today. We're representing over 230,000 employees in various litigations across the country. And one of the common denominators of a lot of those cases are that the people that have the courage to stand up and fight are oftentimes subjected to pressure and intimidation and just kind of an environment where it makes them very uncomfortable to stand up and say, we have rights here and they ought to be vindicated. We're hopeful that the courts in Ohio will agree with us and agree with these 15 teachers that we partnered with to have this fight, and they'll vindicate their rights, and they'll go back and make sure that the union has complied with the existing law at this point back in the school years of 2009, 2010, 2010, 2011, and give an answer to these teachers who believe their dues and fees have been misspent for causes they oppose. So we're encouraged by the fact that they're willing to stand up and let us fight with them in Ohio. We hope we can vindicate the rights of not only these teachers, but the entire class of public employees in Ohio whose rights have probably been violated because union officials have used that money, the dues and fees they're forced to pay as a condition of employment, for purposes that are frankly not legal under the law.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for your time, Mark. Appreciate it.